We have enormous defenses in the human body that help us to guard ourselves against the outside world. Now, we think of the outside world as being very friendly. We love living in it, and indeed it is friendly in many ways, but it is also unfriendly in some ways. We like the sun and the breeze and the birds. We like the outside world. We like nature, but there are many things about nature that can injure the human body, and we have nice defenses against these things. For instance, the skin is dry, which helps to protect us against germs such as fungi or bacteria. We also have an acid mantle on the skin, and that enables us to fight various germs. It also helps the skin to have its proper metabolism, so that's good. We also have certain internal defenses, like the acid in the stomach. We also have an enormous number of white blood cells and red blood cells, and even the pH, the acidity and the alkalinity of the blood. The mineral balance of the blood. All of these kinds of things are very helpful to us to keep our defenses at their very peak. We'll be talking about how the defenses break down so that we get some disease like cancer. If we have a diagnosis of some serious disease, we can know that some way our defenses have broken down. We want to study what we can do to make it so that our defenses are at their very best, so that even an overwhelming agent from the outside would not bring us down.
Welcome to Help Yourself to Health with Dr. Agatha Thrash of Uchee Pines Institute. And now, here's your host, Dr. Thrash.
If we get the diagnosis of cancer from a physician, this means that either our own defenses have broken down in some place, or we have met a very powerful, overwhelmingly injurious enemy. As an example, let's just take the sun. The sun we like to think of as our friend. It is a friend when we look at it, when we see the shadows, when we enjoy being out of doors. But the sun can also be very unfriendly to us. It isn't friendly on the skin. If we get a nice tan, tanning always, 100% of the time, means that your skin has been injured by the sun. So a tan is not all that helpful. A little bit of sunning can help us to utilize vitamin D or provitamin D in the skin. A little bit of sun is very helpful if we have some kind of skin lesion. But generally speaking, too much sun is not good for the human body. Now, I'd like to show to you both a benign as well as a malignant skin lesion, the mole. A mole can be benign, as you see this one here. In fact, if you will notice carefully, you can see in this mole a little hair. That hair, also the sharp borders of this mole, indicate to us that this is a benign mole. If you pressed on this mole, you would find that this mole has a little bit of softness to it. Moles that are not soft, that are not sharply circumscribed, that don't have hairs in them, this kind of mole can be malignant. I'd like to show you two examples of malignant moles. This first one is actually ulcerated. Do you see the ulcerated part, a little yellowish discoloration? And then over on the left of your screen, you will also see that there is a little black crusting there. Up at the top, you will see also some very deep black color, which represents the melanin. Then the bottom portion of this mole, this malignant mole, shows little nodularity. There is also a reaction of the skin to this malignancy. We often have this reaction of the skin to a malignancy. The body is doing its very best to wall off and control the malignancy that we have there. I'd like to show you another malignant mole. This one shows several features. Notice that it sort of spreads out, it fans out, and you can see a variation in the color of the mole. Now, even a benign mole can have a little variation in the color from part to part, but this one is very intense. You will also see a reddish reaction of the skin to this malignant mole. Notice the irregular borders of this mole. That indicates that the skin is being infiltrated by the mole. Now, to infiltrate the skin by the mole, that means that the defenses of the skin are not fully capable of holding this malignant mole in its place. So this is one way that we can meet an overwhelmingly powerful agent that in its full intensity can cause us to have a malignancy. Now, people who are sun exposed quite a lot and have fair skin and freckles are far more likely to get melanomas than are people who have darker skin. The more dark the skin, the less the likelihood of getting a melanoma. Now, of course, there are many other kinds of cancers in the body, and there are also some very good defenses that we have, both those defenses that we are born with and those that we can do by things that we do. As an example, here is a report that I have from the University of Toronto, in which they have studied phytic acid. Now, the word phyto or phytic means from plants. So this is a plant acid. Its chemical name is inositol hexophosphate. So I'm glad we can call it phytic acid. Now, the Lord made the cells of the body in such a way that we can study them with a fair ease. And so these researchers from the University of Toronto, they studied the phytic acid influence on various body tissues, such as the breasts, the colon, and various other tissues. And what they found was this, that the way the cells grow in the colon and in the breasts, the lining cells of the colon and the lining cells of the ducts of the breasts, that these cells are altered by the quantity of phytic acid that one has. Phytic acid is a protective mechanism for us. It's a protective chemical from the foods that we eat. Now, they found that if they gave those foods that are high in phytic acid, and one of which is grains, and they also supplemented with supplements of iron or supplements of calcium, they found that these supplements caused greater abnormalities than we are ordinarily producing by the kind of injurious agents that are ordinarily contacting the body. Phytic acid, if they gave also phytic acid, they found that that would reduce those abnormalities caused by taking iron supplements or taking calcium supplements. And the reduction that they found was between 25 and 53%. So the Lord has made us well. He made us from the minerals and other materials of the earth, and made us so that we respond in a favorable way to many of the things which He has helped us to see and helped us to be able to bring into our own program so that we can have greater defenses against things that may be unfriendly in the outside world. Now, grains are a great part of the food of the entire world. In fact, grains represent probably the biggest single contribution that any plant makes or that any food makes to the kind of dietary that we have. Now, grains can be cooked in a variety of ways. One very nice way is, as we see here in this loaf of bread. Now this loaf of bread was made by my granddaughter, so I'm very proud of it. It may have a little irregularity there on the top, but I'm not concerned about that since it was made by 9 and 10-year-olds, Christina and Melissa. And they gave this nice loaf of bread to grandmother, and it smells so good. And I'm sure that when I cut it, it's also going to look very good. And I'd like to cut it and show you some very interesting things about a good loaf of bread. The crust should be nicely browned, as you see here. If the crust is not brown, if the loaf of bread is actually anemic looking, then the bread is not browned well enough. And on the inside, we want to have it of good whole grain substances. This whole grain bread is whole grain wheat bread. It could have been a mix with wheat and rye, or even corn or some rice flour. Any of these in small quantities can also make a good loaf of bread. But bread represents one of the basic parts of the American diet. But grains in other ways are also very useful. As an example, we use a lot of rice. But when we use it as a boiled rice, we need to boil it a long time. Now this is a little shocking to many people because we've been told about our vegetables that we need to boil vegetables a very short amount of time, the shortest length of time possible, to make them so that they are palatable and they are nice to eat. But with grains, we need to cook them a long time. If you put rice in a pot and cook it, we find that it tastes done long before it's done. And I'd like to show you some grains of starch which I have drawn on the board, which I think will help to illustrate the fact that there is a need for long cooking of rice. Now you will see here potatoes. Actually, potatoes taste done when they are actually done, but not so with oats, not so with wheat, and not so with rice. With oats, with rolled oats, we need to cook rolled oats about 90 minutes in order for them to be entirely done. With wheat, if we're going to just cook up a pot of whole grain, whole kernel wheat, we need to cook that about 3 hours, 2.5 to 3 hours. And the same is true with rice. You will see these sort of onion skin looking configurations of starch granules that are present in these various foods. With rice, when we're cooking it, we need to sort of peel off these individual layers by the length of time that the rice is being cooked. So if you cook it only 30 minutes, then you won't have the entire starch granule fully cooked, and consequently the rice will not be as healthful for you as it could be. In fact, very small portions of remaining parts of this rice kernel, or the starch kernel, can get into the bloodstream and actually stop up certain blood vessels. And that, of course, causes the blood vessel not to be able to supply the tissue around it with blood. That could cause a small sterile abscess. Now, if this occurs in the skin or in a muscle, that's not too bad. But if it occurs in the brain or in the adrenals or liver or kidney or somewhere like that, then of course it's perhaps more dangerous. So there are now indications from science that long cooking of grains is very important for us. Now, if you put a pot of rice on to boil and you boil it for 3 hours, most people think, well, that would not make a very nice dish at all, and that is correct. And so what we need to do is to go through a process ahead of time that will make the dish turn out really very nice. And so I've asked Danique Blackburn to join me here to show just how one can do this kind of process. She is a Texan and a lifestyle counselor from Uchee Pines. And so Danique, tell us what we can do to make rice taste good after boiling 3 hours.
Well, the process is called dextrinizing of grains, And to dextrinize grains, in this instance we're going to be using rice, you want to use a dry skillet over a medium heat over on your stove, and you will pour your grain into your dry skillet. As this grain is being heated on medium heat, you will soon hear, after 2 to 3 minutes, you will begin to hear popping sounds. And what is happening in this dextrinizing process is that the long chains are being broken down into shorter chains, which are easily able to be digested and which also shortens the cooking time. Now, after about 2 to 5 minutes of stirring this on the oven, your grain will be completed being dextrinized. This is how the grains should look after the dextrinizing process. They should be slightly popped open. You should be able to see them on the little grains. There's also another method of dextrinizing. You can put the grains in a dry baking dish in the oven for about 5 minutes at about 325 degrees. This also completes the dextrinizing process.
Very good. And that makes every rice grain fall apart from every other grain.
Yes.
And it also makes it have a nice nutty flavor. And when you're doing this kind of stirring here, that's awfully nice because that's occupational therapy for the person, for the cook, and helps one not to develop a lot of tensions and stresses. Now, not only is the grains very helpful in this way to give us some resistance against cancer, but there are many other foods that are very helpful to enable us to have a resistance against any kind of injurious agent, and especially against cancer. Here is a report that comes from the University of Toronto. They have done a very excellent work that points out the fact that the best diet for man is the original diet that we were given in the Garden of Eden. In the book of Genesis, we are told that the best diet for man, the one that the Lord prescribed for Adam and Eve, is a diet comprised entirely of plant substances. Now, this study that came from the University of Toronto shows that certain food chemicals, or chemicals that make up foods naturally, are broken down in the body and form certain beneficial, but in some instances they can be harmful substances in the colon. One of these is lignans. Lignans can form such substances as enterolactone and enterodiol, and these are beneficial. They're sort of like soothing agents, and so they help to keep the colon from getting cancer, and they are absorbed into the bloodstream, and they also give to some degree, and they give a protection against breast cancer. Now, breast cancer is one of the commonest and very serious diseases of women in our day, so we want to find out what we can do to prevent breast cancer if at all possible. Flaxseed and many other foods, whole legumes, for those who like them, dried seaweeds are high in the lignans that form these substances that are protective to the colon and to the breast and other organs. Cereal brands, so this points up the importance of using whole grains, and many vegetables are high in lignans, which are soothing to the intestinal tract and help to keep us from getting various cancers. What quantity of flaxseed would you use, and what do flaxseed look like? Well, here are some flaxseed that will help you to know what the flaxseed looks like. These can be obtained from a health food store, and they are of course quite tasty, and they're not highly expensive. And so this can help us to be willing to use in the diet those substances from the market that can keep us in good health. About 1 to 4 tablespoons of flaxseed per day would give to us in the diet what the researchers were researching from the University of Toronto. Now here is another one also about flaxseed. This helps to protect us against colon cancer as well as breast cancer. And another one even. This one was published in Cancer Letters, and it tells that we can be protected against cancer of the colon as well. Now, cancers of the colon often start with small polyps. And I have some illustrations of polyps that I'd like to show to you so that you can see just exactly what they look like. Now, if you'll notice here, you see two polyps in this little segment of bowel drawn by an artist. The one at the bottom is a small polyp, or smaller than the one above, and is benign, but the one above has begun to have a few changes in it that could be malignant. The only way to tell is by examining it under the microscope and looking at each portion of it to see how the cells are maturing. And with flaxseed, the number of bowel movements during the time of taking flaxseed will be increased about 30%, and that will also be helpful since cancer-producing agents that might be in the colon will be not active anymore, and those are taken out in the fecal stream and make it so that the colon is protected. Now, I'd like to show you an actual polyp, an actual photograph of a polyp. This is what the physician sees when he looks in a scope to see what the bowel looks like on the inside. You'll notice the normal lining cells or normal covering of the inside of the bowel, and then you'll see the polyp. Notice that this polyp, which is benign, but this polyp has a little bit of indentation up at the top of it, which indicates a variation in the growth pattern. That can be a little bit troublesome when the physician is looking at it, because the physician then doesn't know whether it's malignant or not. But with the kind of equipment we have today, we can very easily go in and snare these little polyps and cut them out. We just take something that looks like a lasso and put it around the polyp, maneuver the polyp in such a way that we can actually get the normal mucosa all around the polyp, and then we just pinch it off or cut it off with the nice equipment that we have and pull it right out. Often this will totally cure a person who has a solitary polyp. Of course, there can be many polyps in the colon, so a person who ever produces one needs to keep a constant watch on the colon to make certain that the colon doesn't produce more. Now, in addition to these kinds of things, we have some other kinds of nice chemicals that are in foods that can protect us against disease. Again, breast and prostate cancer are resisted nicely when we have foods that are high in phytosterols. Now again, we find the word phyto, which means plant, and phytosterols means a certain type of hormone that comes from plants. We call them phytoestrogens or various types of phytosubstances. And the phytoestrogens, or estrogen-like substances, are found in quite a variety of foods that most of us like a lot. For instance, they're found in chestnuts and in rice, whole grain rice, and sesame seed, in rye and alfalfa seed and wheat germ. Many places that these are found. In the common foods that we eat every day. In our book, Nutrition for Vegetarians, a book that has on page 49 a very nice list of the plant sterols. You'll see this listing: apples, cherries, olives, plums, various beans and peanuts and soy products, and tubers of various kinds, carrots and sweet potatoes and yams, all of the nightshades like eggplant and peppers and potatoes, and then of course all the whole grains. That's a very nice listing for us. A number of herbs like alfalfa and anise, garlic and licorice root and the like. You might wonder what these phytosterols do and how they protect us. And I would like to show an illustration for you here on the board of a cell and its nucleus. We'll just draw a very simple cell looking like this. And the nucleus is part of the brains of the cell. And then out on the sides there are substances, there are structures that we call receptors. They are for a wide variety of things. We may find them for cholesterol and other things. And then floating around in the bloodstream, we have these phytoestrogens. Let's say they look like this. And of course, all of these structures are chemical structures, but this one is a plant sterol. And then let's get one from some other source. And let's make it look just a little different, but still with this kind of squared off stem. But let's make it look a little different. And this one is, these are sterols from other sources. So we'll just name them other. And then what happens is that if the sterol comes from a plant, it gets into the receptor, and here it is, like this, and that blocks this receptor from taking a plant sterol, taking a sterol that's not a plant sterol that might be injurious. We'll say that this sterol is an injurious sterol. And so it can't get into these receptors because of the already present plant sterols. And that protects various organs that we have, such as the breast and maybe even the brain and other organs from having an injurious effect from, let's say, estrogens that are produced naturally. Now, since men with prostate cancer can have the prostate cancer inhibited by the use of any estrogen, plant sterols, interestingly enough, have a very fine effect on the prostate to keep it from having the prostate cancer to grow. And so we find that men who emphasize plant foods in the diet, such as fruits, vegetables, whole grains, nuts, and seeds, that these men have less in the way of prostate cancer than do other men. And that as meat and milk, eggs, and cheese are added to a man's diet, he is more likely to develop a malignancy that would, of the prostate that would kill him. And so we see that our divine designer has not only made us well, but also the foods that we eat